This is Story Robot. First story of today is, don't fire the guy who holds the patents. So, some context. My father had a degree in mechanical engineering. Either a master's or doctorate. It had taken him years to get, and he was very proud of that. Thanks to his training, he had found his way working for many well-known companies, working primarily with the procedures used to make various things. Over time, he'd privately began working on an idea that would revolutionize how school and gym lockers worked. See, my father realized that there was a problem with those type of metal lockers. Namely, it was very easy for a person to break into them. What's more, as the lockers were designed, there were multiple exposed moving parts, which meant that if a student put too many books in one, or really anything got against the door, the locker could be jammed shut, making it near on impossible to open. So, for several years, Dad toyed with a number of ideas, before hitting on a new design which would solve all those problems. The inner workings of the locker's locking mechanism would be contained within the door in such a way that 1. It was impossible for someone to shim or break into, 2. The entire mechanism would be enclosed, and 3. It was relatively maintenance-free. Now, at this point, my father was the vice president of manufacturing, and apparently there wasn't a clause in his contract that said that if he designed anything while working for the company, then he had to turn that over to them for profit. Dad still approached the company, offering them the design, but they weren't interested. Dad sat on the design for a while before eventually just taking out several patents on them, and then forgetting about them. About 6 months after his first attempt at getting the company interested, the parent company's chairman of the board passed away, and the board opted to sell off some of the holdings. The company my dad worked for was part of that. The new owners were young guys who seemed to think they knew everything, as young business owners always seem to think, and they set about changing 99% of the way things were being done. At some point, they stumbled across the plans my father had designed. Now that's where things turned curious. They really wanted to start producing this new design, but as they didn't have all the plans and processes laid out for them, they had to turn to my father for answers. Rather than asking him how to do it, or licensing the patents as any reputable company would have done, they ordered him to turn over all his work, or else they would fire him. Dad stood his ground and refused. The new owners and my father went back and forth, arguing over details for several weeks, before finally the new owners fired my father for insubordination. So, after cleaning out his office, and packing things in the trunk of his car, my father headed home and made a few phone calls. He must have gone through 8 or 9 different calls before he got in touch with someone who was interested in what he had to say. See, my dad was under no illusions that the company that had fired him wasn't going to just make those patented lockers on their own. He also knew that though the company itself was relatively small, the owners had money and there was no way he could fight them. However, a larger company could. So he contacted the major competitors and made them an offer. He eventually set up a meeting with some people, wheeled out the prototype he'd made, explained how everything worked and noted that with this system the company could revolutionize the way lockers were both designed, and improve both safety and security. What's more, as he was the only patent holder, for the next 7 years or so, that company could be the only company to produce them. The competitor jumped at the chance and bought all patents both for the design and the process. They even paid my dad a substantial consultancy fee to go out to their manufacturing site and teach their crews how to make the needed tool and die sets to produce them. Less than 6 months after the first company had fired him, their #1 competitor was completely destroying them in the market with this new design, and there wasn't a beep thing the first company could do about it. They did try suing my father, claiming he had stolen their intellectual property, but that case quickly evaporated when they had to admit under oath that they'd never actually signed a contract with him, and there was no requirement that he turn over anything he created to the company. In the 7 years from when the second company bought the locker design and process patents, they pretty handily moved into markets that previously they'd been unable to. The first company soldiered on, but by the time the patent had finally expired, they were a shadow of their former selves. The new owners had sold the company at a loss, with the competitor buying it, only to shut that production facility down due to redundancy. Put maybe 200 people out of work, though given how they'd lost so much business. I wager that it was far less than that. So yeah, the new guys don't want to play ball, threaten the guy that holds the patents on something they want to do, and then fire him, only to have him take everything to their competitor and effectively put them out of business. Our second story of today is, write me up for simple mistakes to get me fired. Prepare to get fired. Private security was my field up until a few years ago. When I say security I don't mean mall cops, but high-end, armed-trained security. I spent a few years working a job in another city away from home, but the company went under so I decided to move back home. I found a security job online. It was simple entry-level, basically sitting behind a computer. You were security for the building, but monitored security for other sites the company owned across 3 states. Like small repair places, factories, places where they stored vehicles, etc. So, I submitted my resume. The next day a guy calls and sets up an interview, awesome because I needed to find work fast. Went to the interview, conducted by a woman I'll call Jane. She was the supervisor and the guy the first talked to was her boss. Jane immediately told me I was way overqualified, which I found strange but okay. Interview went fine and I left. A few hours later she called and said I was hired and set up training days. Now, I won't go through that, just wanted to give background, so let's go to the good parts. She always gave me a cold shoulder. Her boss found out I have all the qualifications, licensing and training to be armed, so he had me come in armed. Nothing fancy, handgun, 3 magazines and handcuffs. She would always make comments about how everyone should be armed, a few of my coworkers I wouldn't trust with a water gun, and she should decide who is armed. Just little comments to get under my skin. Then one day it happened. I was working the front desk reception that day and she sends me a message over Messenger telling me she needs to see me. I go back, she drags me to a side office with a write-up form. Apparently, when I added door access to visitors badge I added the door to the gym in the basement, a mistake but not life-threatening. A week later I didn't sign my timesheet, another for not filling in a form correctly. All minor things everyone has done or did. The end came about 9 months into the job, when I looked at the new timesheet. I was paired with a new officer who had been there a month, only he was listed as shift supervisor. Confused, I took it to her second in command, I'll call him Bob, a great guy. He told me that he brought it up, that I had the experience and seniority to be promoted, and she basically told him to beep off, it was her choice. Anyways, that got me mad. So, I started planning my revenge. I don't normally do this, but I knew one more write-up I would be fired no matter how minor the infraction was. Good thing is during the night shift there is only 2 people and we can't see each other's computers. So I started thinking. I remembered about 4 months prior her car broke down in the parking lot across the street. Instead of having it towed, Jane's father decided to fix it there. No big deal. Only during that time Jane was bringing her husband back into the security office. This was a huge deal. The office took scanning at 3 doors and a keypad to enter. In the whole building only the security staff and 1 cleaning guy had access. It was the headquarters for the company and not even the executives had access. From our computers we could open any door, turn off any camera or alarm and open any gate in any building that the company owned. So it was a big deal because we had the keys to the kingdom. That was a huge beeping violation, so I hatched my plan. Under the excuse of having a smoke, I went out to reception and copied the visitor log from those days. I then went back in and accessed the video feeds. You could go back a year for all video feeds, and took screenshots of her husband entering the doors and office. The office itself had no camera, as well as with time stamps, him leaving and the fact he never swiped in, which following someone into a door, even if they hold it open you must scan your card. I logged onto my private email and sent it to another email knowing they don't log what you do on the computers. I got home and sent all the pics, the log copies and everything to not only her boss, but his boss whose job was investigating breaches and theft. I also included every dirty trick she pulled playing favoritisms etc. The fallout didn't take long. 2 days later, a Friday, I went in for afternoon shift and Bob was at Jane's workstation. I looked confused and said Jane was suspended for a week and that Monday, I had to come in and speak with her boss and boss's boss, but I would be paid for it. Also, everyone was interviewed. It was great, rumors were flying, I was laughing on the inside. Okay, interview day. I go in and they started questioning me. They knew I worked while she brought her husband in and asked me. I spilled everything after acting scared and getting assurances, it would be confidential and I won't be punished. I didn't tell them I sent it but they asked everyone. I left out some things in the email and added some things that weren't. I didn't want to be labeled as a snitch. It went on for an hour and I left. Next day an email is waiting, Jane was fired, Bob was in charge until a replacement is added. I had a long talk with Bob that day. Turns out Jane was scared of me because I was more qualified for her job than she was and knew I was her boss's golden boy. She was afraid, rightfully so it turned out, that I might take her job and admitted to him she wanted me gone. A fact he told them in his interview. Also that she didn't want to hire me, but her boss made her. Turns out her boss was aware of things and looking for an excuse to fire her but it had to be big. Jane had been working at that department for 10 years. It was her first real job and security was all she knew. They blacklisted her, which means unless a company was really desperate, she wouldn't get a security job anywhere in the state. Icing on the cake. I know you want to know. Yes, I was offered her job, no I didn't take it. I told them that Bob deserved it more, he did, and that I would be happy being a shift supervisor. So that's what I stayed for the next 2 years until I left. Thank you for watching. Error. Problem detected. Not enough subscribers. Please subscribe, like and comment.